My foster mom used to tell people I was emotionally disturbed. That's why no one believed me when I said her boyfriend wasn't just disciplining me. I left when I was 17. This year, I graduated law school. And guess who's on trial with my name on the case file? She told them I was emotionally disturbed. That's why no one ever believed me when I said her boyfriend wasn't just disciplining me. And for years, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. Until I found his name in a court file, with mine listed as part of the prosecution. Hey, I'm Alex. I'm 28 now, but this story starts when I was 9. That's the year both my parents died in a car accident on the way back from one of my baseball games. I don't remember the crash. I just remember waking up in the hospital, asking for my mom, and seeing a social worker sitting beside my bed with a clipboard and a brochure for a group home. What came next felt like a blur that never really ended, just stretched into years of bouncing between temporary homes, paperwork, and that cold, soft voice people use around kids when they're trying not to say something awful. But the worst part wasn't the homes. It wasn't the loneliness. It was what came after, Linda. Linda looked like the kind of woman people trusted. She had cropped blonde hair, big glasses, a garden in her backyard, and this fake laugh that adults always seemed to love. She made cookies when the caseworkers came. She had a file full of thank you letters from other kids. She had a boyfriend named Rick, who wore slacks and polos and always called me sport. They got approved to take me in when I was 11. And for a while, I thought maybe I got lucky. They were nice at first, almost too nice. I had my own room. They bought me new clothes, and Linda insisted on calling me sweetie. But there was something in the air, like static you can't see, but always feel. Rick would call me out for little things, chewing with my mouth open, walking too loud, talking back. He'd squeeze my shoulder a little too hard when I didn't respond fast enough. Once, he accidentally closed a door on my hand, then made me apologize for being in the way. Linda didn't flinch. She said I needed structure. And when I started pulling away, stopped talking as much, stopped smiling, she booked me an appointment with a child psychiatrist and told him I was showing signs of oppositional defiant disorder. I remember sitting on that leather couch, staring at a framed poster about ADHD, while she told the therapist that I was emotionally unstable and acted out for attention. When I tried to speak, she'd cut in. When I mentioned Rick, she'd smile and say, he's just firm. Kids these days aren't used to discipline. I was 12 the first time Rick hit me with a belt. He said I rolled my eyes at Linda during dinner. I don't remember if I did. But that night, he closed the door, turned on the bathroom fan, and told me, this is how boys become men. He struck me 3 times, back, legs, and the back of my neck. I cried. Of course I did. But when Linda found me in my room later, she looked disappointed. You're not going to play the victim again, are you? She said. I tried telling a teacher once. Told her Rick was hurting me at home. She filed a report. The next week, 2 caseworkers came to the house, asked Linda a few polite questions, then smiled and left. That night, Linda cried, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Rick blamed me for making her feel like a failure. Then he made me kneel in the hallway until midnight. From that day on, the label stuck. Emotionally disturbed. It was on every report, every school file, every appointment. No one asked me what I meant by hurting. They just assumed I meant spanking. Maybe yelling. Maybe I was sensitive, or dramatic, or manipulative. Linda told them I had a trauma narrative. She was so good at twisting things that eventually I stopped even trying. And the truth is, there was a part of me that started to believe it. Because if every adult around you agrees something isn't happening, even when it's literally happening, you start to doubt your own eyes, your own skin, your own pain. I ran away when I was 17, 1 month before my 18th birthday. I took $140 from Rick's wallet while he was passed out in front of the TV, packed a gym bag, climbed out the bathroom window, and walked 5 miles to a bus station. Slept in a laundromat for 2 nights. Then found a local church that offered free hot meals. I lied about my age and got a job bussing tables at a 24-hour diner. Got my GED. Took community college classes at night. And slowly, painfully slowly, I started to piece myself together. By 22, I was enrolled in a state university. Law school had always been a whisper in the back of my head, but it wasn't until I watched a pro bono defense attorney speak during one of our seminars that I knew. I wanted to fight for the kids who never got a voice. The ones like me, who'd been dismissed, silenced, blamed. I worked through school, clerked for a public defender's office, graduated in the top 10% of my class. This year, this exact spring, I got hired by a mid-sized criminal firm that takes on a lot of public cases. And 3 weeks ago, I was handed a new intake file from one of the senior partners. She said, we've got a serious one. CPS referred it directly. Foster home situation. Might go federal depending on the charges. I opened the file. Rick Douglas. Charged with child endangerment. aggravated assault of a minor, and unlawful restraint. The victim? A 14-year-old girl placed in the same foster home I once lived in. The foster parent on record? Linda. I just stared at the page. The world tilted. I thought I was going to throw up. I could still see his face, hear the belt, smell the sweat on his shirt. But then something shifted. I closed the folder, took a breath, then walked back into the partner's office and said, "I'd like to stay on this case. Please." She looked up. "You sure? It's bad. Could be triggering." I nodded. "That's exactly why I need to see it through." That night, I didn't sleep. I went for a walk around the block at 3 a.m. and called the only person who knew my full story, my old college mentor. He was the one who helped me apply to law school. He was the first adult in my life who ever told me I wasn't broken. When I told him about the file, he didn't even hesitate. "Alex," he said, "this isn't a coincidence. This is your moment. You don't owe them silence anymore." And I think that was the moment I realized I wasn't a lost kid anymore. I was a man with the law on my side. And they were about to find out what justice looked like. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on trial. They were. When I first read her name in the file, Jasmine Alvarez, age 14, I pictured someone who probably looked like me at that age. Guarded eyes, slumped shoulders, too quiet for her own good. But nothing could have prepared me for the photos attached to the report. There were bruises. On her arms, on her back, along the underside of her chin like someone had grabbed her face and forced it upward. The medical report noted a possible hairline fracture in her wrist, old scar tissue on her thighs, and signs of repeated blunt force trauma. Rick had escalated. The same man who once beat a 12-year-old boy for taking too long in the shower had now hurt a girl so badly she ended up in the ER. But here's the thing that gutted me. Jasmine didn't go to the hospital on her own. Her school counselor called 911 after Jasmine showed up to class with sunglasses and a limp. That woman, she was a hero. She asked Jasmine if she'd been hurt at home, and Jasmine just whispered, "Please don't tell them I told you." They called Child Protective Services immediately. The ER doctors documented her injuries. Jasmine finally said the words I remember being too scared to say. "He hits me. Linda tells me not to make him mad." Linda was still calling herself a foster mother, still blaming the kid. In her interview with investigators, she actually said, and I quote, "Jasmine has always had a flair for drama. I think she did it to herself for attention." That line sat in my gut like a rusted knife, because it was word for word the same thing she once told my therapist. Same words, same pattern, same poison. I stayed late at the office that night. I went back through Jasmine's school records, her CPS files, everything I could find. She'd been placed with Linda and Rick 6 months ago. Her previous foster placement had ended because the foster mother got sick. No signs of trouble before that. And then I found something buried deep in the system. 2 previous foster children had stayed with Linda in the past 10 years. One was returned to the system for disruptive behavior. The other aged out and disappeared. No records. No forwarding address. Just gone. That's when I realized Jasmine might not be the first. She might be the only one who ever got far enough to be believed. We scheduled our first interview with Jasmine 2 days later. She was placed in temporary protective custody while the investigation played out. The DA's office had officially brought charges against Rick, and Linda was being considered an accessory, though she wasn't in custody yet. I requested that I be allowed to sit in on Jasmine's statement. Some people thought it would be a conflict of interest. My supervisor didn't. "If anyone knows how to make her feel safe, it's you," she told me. When I entered the room, Jasmine was already seated. Small. Too small for her age. Her hair was pulled back tight, like she was trying to keep every strand under control. Her eyes flicked up at me, then back to the floor. The child advocate introduced me. "This is Alex. He's one of the lawyers on your case. He knows a lot about Linda and Rick." Jasmine didn't say anything at first. She just hugged her knees to her chest and mumbled, "Am I going to have to see them?" "No," I said softly. "Not unless you want to. You're safe now, and we believe you." Her eyes finally locked with mine. And I swear, for just a second, I saw myself in that stare. Not just fear, but confusion. The kind of confusion that only comes when you've been told your pain isn't real so many times, you start to question it yourself. Jasmine spoke for nearly an hour. She told us about Rick yelling, about him pulling her by the hair when she didn't clean fast enough, about Linda standing in the doorway during punishment, arms crossed, face stone cold. She said Linda told her not to cry too loud because people might think you're faking it. That phrase hit me in the chest. After the meeting, Jasmine asked if she could talk to me alone. The counselor hesitated but agreed, only with the door open and a staff member nearby. Jasmine looked at me and said, "Did they ever do it to you too?" I nodded. She asked if it ever stops hurting. I told her the truth. The bruises stop. But your mind remembers. That's why we talk about it. That's why we fight back. And then she asked something that still stays with me. If I speak in court, will people believe me? I didn't answer right away, because I remembered what it was like when people didn't. When their eyes glazed over, when they gave polite smiles and dismissed you as a troubled kid with anger issues. But finally, I said, yes, because now you've got people who will fight for you, including me. That week, I started reaching out to every contact I had. I pulled my own foster records. Legally, I had the right now. Most of it was useless, redacted, or covered in vague bureaucratic phrases like poor impulse control and subject resists authority. But buried in a 2009 case summary was something unexpected. An anonymous complaint had been made from a neighbor on our block back then. The woman said she heard shouting, crying, and what sounded like hitting coming from the home. She filed a noise complaint. It was marked "No follow-up necessary" by the agency. They buried it. I tracked her down. Her name was Mrs. Eileen Sharp. Still lived in the same house. I knocked on her door on a Thursday afternoon, explained who I was, and her eyes widened the second I said Linda and Rick's names. "You were the boy who always looked like he hadn't slept," she said. I asked her if she'd be willing to give a statement. Not only did she agree, she started pulling out physical notebooks she'd kept back then. She'd logged dates, times, noises. She told me she'd reported it twice and got a letter saying the situation had been handled. We got her signed affidavit the next morning. Then came the next bombshell. One of the former caseworkers who'd been assigned to my file, retired now, reached out. She had heard about the case from a friend still in the department and said she had regrets about the way things were handled. She remembered me, said she always had doubts, but that Linda was very persuasive, and that the department was overloaded back then. She offered to write a statement, saying she believed the home had created an environment of coercion and fear. I added her file to the growing pile of evidence. This wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. This was about patterns, a system that allowed abusers to weaponize structure against vulnerable kids and call it discipline. And now that structure was beginning to crack. We got word that Rick's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. He was scared. The evidence was mounting, and Jasmine had officially agreed to testify, with trauma-informed support by her side. Linda? She was still playing the same game, blaming the child, painting herself as the sainted foster mother who tried to fix a broken kid. She even gave a statement to a local news outlet claiming the charges were completely fabricated by a deeply disturbed girl with a troubled past. I printed out the article, brought it to our legal team, and said, if she wants to lie in public, let's bring the truth to court. We filed for joint prosecution, Rick as the primary abuser, Linda as a complicit enabler. The DA agreed. They would both be facing charges. Together. By the end of the month, we were preparing for trial. Jasmine was seeing a therapist weekly. She was scared, but she was steady. Every time she came to prep, she sat a little straighter, spoke a little louder. And I'll never forget the day we showed her the full file, the documents, the statements, the neighbor's notebook, everything. She looked up at me and whispered, "No one's ever fought for me like this before." I smiled and said, "You're not alone this time." But in my head, I was thinking something else. Linda and Rick should have never been allowed to do this to anyone else. And if I have anything to say about it, they never will again. The first day of trial felt like walking into a burning building I once escaped from. Everything was familiar. The stale courtroom air, the long wooden benches, the silence before the storm. But now I was on the other side of the fire. I wasn't the lost kid sitting in the back with bruises under his sleeves and a caseworker whispering about manageable behavior problems. Now, I was Mr. Alexander Ruiz, assistant prosecutor. And across from me, Rick Douglas, in a Navy suit, still trying to look like a man in control. Linda sat next to him, eyes empty, as if daring someone to suggest she'd ever done anything wrong. That's the thing about people like her. They don't just lie to others. They lie to themselves until their whole reality depends on the lie holding. But we were done letting her version be the only one in the room. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. A few reporters sat near the back. A couple from CPS, Jasmine's new guardian, and Jasmine herself, sitting just outside with a trauma counselor and the child advocate. She'd testify later, but she wanted to be there from the beginning. She said she needed to see them look small. I stayed composed. That's something law school drills into you. Neutral face, steady voice. But when Rick leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer and smiled, I saw it. That same smirk. The one he used when he told me I should be grateful. When he said, "You'd be in juvie without us." And I thought, not this time. The prosecution opened with the facts, hospital records, photographic evidence, Jasmine's journal entries we'd been cleared to include, and the pattern of previous complaints ignored or buried over the years. Our angle wasn't just about abuse. It was about systemic manipulation. A home that used the language of order and foster care reform to hide a cycle of harm. A foster mother who let it happen. A man who escalated behind closed doors. Rick's defense tried to poke holes in Jasmine's credibility. She has a history of outbursts. She's unstable. This is a troubled teen with behavioral issues. It was almost laughable, the same script they used on me. Word for word. But then our team called the school counselor. She told the jury how Jasmine wore sunglasses inside. How she flinched when someone raised their voice. How she once asked if she could earn food back after not finishing chores. Then we brought in the ER nurse. The x-rays. The neighbor from my old block. And finally, the former caseworker. Each witness didn't just testify, they connected dots. One by one, the jury started to lean forward. We weren't telling a story. We were revealing a pattern so exact, so rehearsed, it couldn't have been accidental. And then came the part that shifted everything. During discovery, we'd found a file, half buried, never followed up, about a former foster teen who lived with Linda and Rick for 3 months in 2015. The notes were brief, non-compliant, ran away, closed file after aging out. The name was Marcus C. I tracked him down. Took weeks. Old phone numbers, bounced addresses, no public record of higher education or formal employment. But eventually, I found him living 2 towns over, working construction under the table. He didn't want to talk at first. Don't care about them, he said. They got what they wanted. I got out. But when I told him about Jasmine, about her injuries, about what she'd been through, he froze. And then he said, "You're the kid who ran away before me, right? Rick said you ended up in jail. Linda used to tell us that's where we'd all end up." I told him I was a lawyer now. And he laughed. "I hope you burn 'em both," he said. Marcus agreed to testify, under protection, with an advocate present. And when he walked into the courtroom, in work boots and a clean button-up, Rick's face finally changed. He recognized him. Marcus took the stand and told the jury about the discipline room. About the time Rick made him sleep in the bathtub for a week because he smelled like laziness. About how Linda used to bring him cold food and tell him he was lucky they hadn't sent him back to the state. He had no proof. No photos. Just his words. But they matched Jasmine's. And mine. And the ones from that neighbor logbook. Suddenly, the emotional teen narrative started crumbling. Then it was Jasmine's turn. She was calm. Not robotic, calm. Her voice shook when she talked about the belt. About being made to clean for hours without water breaks. About Linda telling her, "If you tell anyone, we'll say you've always been like this." But then she looked directly at Rick and said, "You don't scare me anymore." Dead silence in the room. The judge asked if she wanted to take a break. Jasmine shook her head. "I want to finish," she said. "Because I want everyone to know what kind of people they are. And I want to go home and never think about them again." That night, after court, I walked Jasmine to the car. Her counselor was waiting. She looked up at me and asked, "Do you think they'll go to jail?" I didn't promise her anything. But I said, "If they don't, the whole system's a lie. And I'm not going to let it be." Cross-examination was brutal. Rick's attorney tried every angle. Questioned Jasmine's mental health. Implied she had a history of fabricating. Even brought up the fact that she once got detention for pushing another student. But Jasmine held firm. "I pushed him because he pulled my hair and told me I smelled like a dog," she said. No one believed me then either. Linda took the stand next. She tried to cry. Told the court she had no idea what Rick was doing. That she thought Jasmine was just hormonal and acting out. That she had only ever wanted to help troubled youth. I watched the jury's faces. Not one of them bought it. Then came Rick. Smug. Defiant. He said he believed in tough love. That he never laid a hand on anyone that didn't need it. That kids these days don't know discipline. And then the prosecutor handed him a photo. A close-up of the bruise on Jasmine's shoulder. One shaped almost exactly like the buckle of his belt. His face twitched. Just once. But it was enough. Closing arguments came at the end of that week. I didn't give them. I wasn't lead. But I sat beside the DA as we made our case. This wasn't about discipline. This was about control. This was a home built on silence. A system rigged by adults who wore kindness like a mask while using the law as a cage. And these children, these survivors, deserve to be believed. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Every hour felt like a year. When they returned, the foreman's voice was clear. Guilty. On all counts. Rick, 25 years. No parole before 18. Linda, 15 years, with an additional probationary period barring her from ever fostering again. Rick didn't flinch. Linda sobbed for the cameras on the way out. She kept looking back like someone would stop it. Like she was still waiting for the narrative to twist her way. But this time it didn't. This time, the story belonged to the survivors. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless in a courtroom. I felt like I had turned the system that once crushed me into a weapon for justice. The strange part about justice is that it doesn't come with peace. Not right away. The day after the verdict, I didn't feel like celebrating. I just went home, closed the blinds, sat on the couch, and stared at the ceiling for hours. My phone buzzed nonstop. Congratulatory messages from coworkers, a voicemail from a local news anchor, even a LinkedIn request from someone I hadn't spoken to since undergrad. But I didn't answer anything. I didn't have the language for what I was feeling. It wasn't joy. It was release. It was the moment your muscles realize they've been clenched for 17 years and finally let go. The next week, I received an envelope in my firm mailbox. No return address. Handwritten. Inside was a single folded note. Thank you for believing her. I never got that chance. But watching you speak for her made me feel like maybe someone would have spoken for me too. I'm proud of you, even if I don't know you. There was no name. Just a date. November 2008. That's when it hit me. Someone out there had been watching the trial. Maybe another foster kid. Maybe someone who passed through Linda and Rick's home before me, or after, or someone who escaped another home like it. And that was the first moment I really understood. This story wasn't just mine. Jasmine's testimony had shaken more than just the courtroom. 2 additional former foster children came forward with similar stories. Neither wanted to testify, but they both submitted private statements. One had been locked in a garage for days. The other said she remembered Rick training Linda to ignore screams. Jasmine's story gave them permission to speak, not to the world, but to themselves. A few days later, Jasmine's guardian reached out and asked if we could meet for lunch. I agreed. We sat outside a cafe, her in a hoodie and headphones around her neck, me in my usual business casual armor. When I asked how she was doing, she said, "I keep expecting to get in trouble for breathing." I didn't respond at first. I just let the silence settle. Then I said, "You're allowed to breathe. You're allowed to exist. You don't owe anyone perfection to be safe." She didn't cry. Jasmine doesn't cry easily. But she said something I'll never forget. "I used to think I'd die in that house. Now, I think I might become a therapist." And I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in a long time. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to happen. The case started making noise. A local journalist wrote a feature piece called "The Boy Who Became the Lawyer Who Took Down His Abuser." It was a little sensational, sure, but it was honest. He'd attended every day of the trial, got every quote right. He even mentioned Jasmine by name, but only with her permission. Emails started pouring in after that. One from a state congresswoman's assistant. One from a nonprofit asking if I'd be willing to speak at a fundraiser. A message from a law student who said she was thinking of dropping out until she read the story and decided to stay and fight instead. And then came the email that hit the hardest. It was from Linda's sister. She said she hadn't spoken to Linda in years. She apologized, not on behalf of Linda, but for not realizing what was happening. I saw bruises on the boys once. I thought maybe she was just raising them strict. But now I think I chose not to see. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Just wanted me to know she believed us now. And that meant more than I expected. But healing wasn't linear. Not for me. Not for Jasmine. Some nights, I'd wake up gasping. Others, I'd hear Rick's voice in my dreams, cool and quiet and full of fake patience. And every time I saw a belt looped over a chair, my stomach still tightened. So I went back to therapy. Not because I was broken, because I finally believed I was worth repairing. My therapist, Dr. Sean, was nothing like the ones Linda dragged me to. She didn't ask if I still held on to anger. She asked when I first learned to hide pain. I told her about the nights Rick made me kneel on the floor until my knees bled. The time Linda dumped my dinner in the trash because I talked too slow. The time I called CPS myself and got grounded for 2 weeks after they left. She didn't write anything down for the first session. She just listened. And at the end, she said, "It's a miracle you survived. But even more than that, it's a miracle you still believe in justice." And that broke something open in me I hadn't touched in years. Jasmine, meanwhile, started school again. Real school. In a place where no one knew her as the girl from the trial. Her new guardian, Mrs. Alvarez, was warm but firm. Jasmine sent me a photo of the dog they adopted. Said, "He sleeps outside my door. Just in case." We still talk every other week. She asked me about the law sometimes. Asked what kind of degree you need to work in trauma therapy. I sent her 3 college links. She said she wants to help kids like me before they start thinking silence is safer. She's only 14, but she talks like she's 40. And I guess that's the price of survival. A few months later, I got word that the state was reviewing foster home recertification protocols because of our case. Small steps, but real ones. My firm was asked to consult on a committee focused on reevaluating disciplinary practices within long-term placements. And guess who was invited to speak? Not me. Jasmine. She stood in front of a room of adults in blazers and said, "If you care more about being obeyed than being trusted, you shouldn't be around children." I nearly applauded. One day, I returned home and found another envelope. No name, no return address, just a folded piece of paper with handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. It was from Marcus, the former foster kid who testified. All it said was, I moved out of my mom's garage, got a job with a company that actually gives me benefits. Thanks for pulling me out of the shadow. I didn't know I could stand in the light. So yeah, justice didn't fix everything. I still get nightmares. Jasmine still has scars. There are probably still kids out there in homes like Linda's. But here's what's different now. They're not invisible anymore. Not to me. Not to the court. Not to the world. Because the boy who once sat alone in a locked room and wondered if he was crazy, he grew up to put his abusers on trial and win. You think once a trial ends, that's it. Verdict. Sentencing. Closure. The courtroom clears out and the story is over. But with trauma, especially childhood trauma, it's never over. It just shifts. And for me, that shift began when a brown cardboard box landed on my desk with a post-it that said, "You're going to want to sit down." It was from the state's Office of Child Welfare Audits. Inside, copies of my original foster care file, including newly unsealed case notes. Notes I'd never been allowed to see as a minor. What I found inside made my blood run cold. There it was. A copy of the CPS call from when I told my teacher Rick had been hurting me. I remembered that moment clearly. I was 13. I didn't use the word abuse. I was too scared, too unsure. But I said he hit me, that he made me kneel for hours, that I was scared to go home. A report was filed. A home visit was conducted. And then, unsubstantiated. Child may be exaggerating. Guardian reports child has behavioral issues. The same day, another note. Linda Ruiz presented documentation from 2 prior therapy sessions diagnosing oppositional defiant tendencies. No visible marks on child. Case closed. Except, here's the thing. The documentation she provided? Forged. A post-it attached to the audit noted. Therapist listed in original report has since confirmed they never treated a minor named Alexander Ruiz. Signature on document appears to be falsified. Linda fabricated an entire therapist file to discredit me, and the system bought it. I sat there staring at the paper for a long time. Then I flipped the page. Another report. A neighbor complaint from 2009, Eileen Sharps. Again, no visible signs of neglect. Family appears cooperative. The word cooperative hit me in the chest. Because Linda was a master at that. She baked cookies. Had clean counters. Memorized my diagnosis. She didn't need to be innocent. She just needed to look believable. That same week, I got a request for a meeting. In person. It was from someone I never expected to hear from. Karen Wright, my original CPS caseworker. She was retired now, apparently living in Arizona. But she'd read the trial coverage. She said she needed to talk. I agreed. We met at a small cafe near the courthouse. She looked older than I remembered, slight, stiff in the shoulders, white hair pulled into a bun. She had a yellow manila folder under her arm and didn't speak until we both had coffee. Then she said, "You probably hate me." I didn't answer. She looked down at the cup and said, "I made mistakes. Some I knew I was making. Some I didn't realize until I watched that girl on the witness stand." I asked her if she remembered closing my abuse case. She nodded. I remember how Linda handed me paperwork before I even asked for it. How Rick stood in the hallway with his arms crossed. How polite she was. How she said you acted out for attention after your parents died. She paused. And I remember thinking, that's what a good home looks like. Then she slid the folder across the table. Inside was a photocopy of the internal note she'd added to my file, the one that never made it to the court system. Kid seems off. Not sure if it's trauma or something deeper. Guardian might be overcompensating. I never filed it officially, she said. Didn't want to stir things up unless I was certain. I asked her if she'd be willing to sign an affidavit now. To my surprise, she said yes. She even asked if she could testify, if needed, at any hearings in the future involving the foster system. She looked me in the eye and said, "I didn't listen to you when it mattered, but I'll never make that mistake again." We submitted her affidavit to the State Review Board investigating outdated home licensing procedures. It helped push forward a proposal for mandatory third-party interviews with foster children. Ones done away from the home, with child specialists, not just social workers. And I got asked to testify myself, not as a lawyer, as a former foster child. Standing in front of that legislative panel was a surreal experience. I told them how easy it was to hide abuse behind a clean living room and a fake smile. How I learned to lie about being okay because it was easier than being punished for honesty. And how, when Jasmine walked into the courtroom, I didn't see a troubled teen. I saw myself, at 13, scared, dismissed, and already halfway convinced that pain was just something you were supposed to accept if you didn't want to be moved again. Afterward, one of the state reps came up to me and said, "You should consider running for something." I laughed. "Like what?" "Chief of trauma." She smiled, like someone who actually gives a damn about kids. It was a joke, I think. But for the first time, it didn't sound impossible. A few days later, I got a message from Marcus, the former foster kid who testified. He'd enrolled in community college, was working on a degree in criminal justice. Said he figured, if you can survive it and still want to fix it, maybe I can too. And then I heard from Jasmine again. She'd written an op-ed for a local youth paper titled, "What Happens When Someone Believes You?" She sent it to me with a note. For the next kid who reads this and thinks they're crazy. I kept one thing from the box of files. A photo from the original CPS visit to Linda's house. It was me, in the background, slumped in a chair, eyes swollen, shoulders curled in. You wouldn't even recognize me. I pinned it above my desk. Not because I want to remember the pain, because I want to remember what it cost me to forget who I was, and what it meant to finally get him back. The last time I saw Rick Douglas, he looked like a man who knew his story was over. Sentencing day doesn't have the tension of a trial. The verdict is already in. The facts are no longer up for debate. But there's a different kind of weight in the room, one made of finality, closure, or something like it. Rick sat motionless at the defendant's table, hands folded, eyes dead ahead. Not defiant, not smug, just hollow. Linda looked worse. She'd aged 10 years in the 2 months since the trial. The media coverage had scorched every shred of the perfect foster mom image she built. She'd been dropped by her lawyer, barred from fostering, evicted from the house she once bragged about during interviews with caseworkers. And now, she stood next to Rick, pale and shaking, waiting to hear how long her life would stay behind bars. Before the judge read the sentences, victims were given the opportunity to speak. Jasmine was first. She stood tall, her foster mom at her side. She didn't cry, didn't rage. She just read from a single handwritten page. When I lived in your house, I didn't feel like a person. I felt like a project you could punish. I used to think something was broken in me. But now I know it wasn't me, it was you. And I want you to know that even though you hurt me, I'm still here. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. She stepped down without looking back. Then it was my turn. I wasn't planning to speak. I told myself this was Jasmine's moment, not mine. But something in me couldn't stay quiet, not this time. So I walked up to the front, cleared my throat, and said, I lived in their house when I was 12. I was labeled disturbed, angry, unstable. I wasn't. I was scared. Every time I told the truth, someone told me I was lying. And every time I asked for help, someone reminded me how lucky I was to have a bed at all. That home didn't save me. It tried to erase me. I paused, looked at Rick. You once told me I'd end up in prison. You were half right. We both ended up here. But only one of us is leaving. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge took a breath before speaking. Then came the sentences. Rick Douglas, 25 years. No parole before 18. Lifetime ban from any institution involving minors. Linda Callahan, 15 years. Eligible for parole in 10. Permanent removal from all foster care registries. Linda began to cry. Real tears this time. She reached out toward Rick as they pulled her from the bench. Rick didn't flinch. But just before the bailiff cuffed him, he turned to me and said 4 words. You think you won. It wasn't loud, just sharp, like a last needle meant to draw blood. I stared back at him and replied, no, she did. I didn't need to say Jasmine's name. He knew. I walked out into the daylight and felt it hit my skin like something holy. Jasmine came over, earbuds around her neck, hands in her hoodie. She said, he looked scared. I nodded. He should be. Then she said, so what now? And I laughed, because that was the same question I'd asked myself 100 times after the trial. The truth? There's no final scene when your abuser goes to prison. No satisfying movie music. No ribbon tied around your pain. There's just the next morning. And the one after that. You get up. You work. You heal. Some days you remember. Some days you forget. And slowly, your story becomes yours again. Not something that happened to you, but something you survived. 3 months later, Jasmine sent me a text. Got accepted into the youth advocacy internship. I'm going to help other kids speak up. Then, also, I got my first A in math. Told you I wasn't dumb. She wasn't. Not even close. I went back to the courthouse one last time. Not for a trial. For a panel. They asked me to speak about trauma-informed prosecution. About the future of child advocacy law. About what needs to change. I brought Jasmine with me. She didn't say much, just sat in the front row. But when I finished, she stood. Applauded. And others followed. And I thought, this is the legacy Rick will never touch. This is what Linda can't erase. This girl standing here, is justice. Not just because she lived, but because she's learning how to fight back. There's a moment every lawyer dreams of, standing in a courtroom, holding a file with your name on it, knowing your work mattered. But this wasn't just any file. This was his file. Rick Douglas, defendant, convicted. And right beneath the charge summary, under the prosecution team. Assistant District Attorney, Alexander Ruiz. My name. In black ink. Right there on the page where they used to write, emotionally disturbed. After the sentencing, things didn't go back to normal, because there was no normal to return to. Not really. I took 2 weeks off. First real break I'd taken in years. No court, no depositions, no legal briefs. Just me, a second-hand couch, and a stack of books I hadn't touched since law school. And still, every morning I woke up at 6 a.m. like I was bracing for impact. For the next call. The next fight. Turns out, trauma doesn't care that the trial is over. It shows up in quieter ways. Like the way I still flinched when I heard a belt snap. Or how I froze every time someone said, "good foster parent," in a meeting. Or the way I couldn't stand the sound of wood creaking behind me. But I also noticed something else. I had more good days than bad ones now. More mornings where I opened the window instead of closing the blinds. More nights where I slept through without jolting awake, heart racing. More space in my head for possibility, instead of just survival. I went back to therapy. Kept seeing Dr. Shun. We talked about identity. About what it meant to stop defining myself by the things I escaped. About letting joy exist in my life without guilt. She asked me once, "When did you start believing you deserved to win?" I told her it was the day Jasmine looked Rick in the eye and said, "You don't scare me anymore." Because that was the day I saw someone else do what I couldn't at her age. And that changed everything. My firm offered me a promotion. Bigger caseload, better office, more influence. I turned it down. Instead, I transferred to the Juvenile Justice Division. Because I didn't want to just punish abusers. I wanted to protect the kids who still hadn't escaped them. I started mentoring law students. Kids who'd come from rough homes, group facilities, juvenile records. One of them, a first-year named Darnell, told me he got inspired by the article about the trial. Said, "I figured, if someone like you could get out, maybe I can too." Someone like me. The phrase used to feel like a curse. Now it felt like purpose. And Jasmine, she kept thriving. She was back in school full-time. Started going by her full name again. Jasmine Alvarez. No middle initial, no shame. She joined a youth panel on foster system reform. Began speaking at shelters and outreach events. She even got invited to testify before a legislative committee about children's rights in protective custody. But my favorite update? She adopted another dog. Named him Justice. No joke. She texted me. He chewed up my social studies book. I think he's anti-government. Then, 6 months after the trial, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. Carefully printed in all caps. From Rick. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It wasn't long. Just 4 lines. "You think I lost. But you turned Jasmine into a weapon. I made men. You make victims. She'll hate you someday too." I didn't respond. Didn't report it. Didn't need to. Because nothing in that letter had power. It wasn't insight. It was decay, his decay. A man rotting inside a narrative that used to work for him. But not anymore. He could shout from the darkness all he wanted. We were in the light now. The last scene of this story doesn't take place in a courtroom. It's just me, in my apartment, late at night, pulling out an old folder. Inside are things I'd kept hidden for years. Photocopies of my CPS reports. A letter I wrote to a social worker at 13 and never sent. A school essay titled, "What I Want to Be When I Grow Up." The last page was a drawing. Crude. Childish. Sloppy crayon work. A boy in a cape. Standing in front of a courtroom. The word, lawyer, scribbled above it in big blue letters. I must have drawn it after one of the times Linda told me I'd end up in jail. I didn't remember keeping it. But I looked at it now, with my degree hanging above my desk, with Jasmine's article framed on the wall, with Rick's name printed under convicted offender, and I thought, that kid knew. Even when no one believed him. Even when the system wrote him off. Even when silence felt safer than the truth. He knew he wasn't broken. He was becoming. This story isn't just about what was done to me. It's about what I did next. And who I got to help along the way. My name is Alexander Ruiz. I was a foster kid. I was abused. I was silenced. But now, I'm a lawyer. And my name's on the case file. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day. And trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.